Well, thanks for the introduction, Jeff. For those who don't know me, I've been with the MIB for almost exactly 6 years now, shockingly. I had a long career in the civil service, specifically the Foreign Office, before that, and I was invited to join the MIB in 2018 to bottom out the implications for the business of leaving the EU and plan a program of mitigation. And so that was quite exciting work. And then other things came my way, and my position became permanent. And so I am now the Public Affairs Officer responsible for external relationships, particularly with government. And of course, you will know that we work under agreements with not just the UK government, but with the governments of the territories that we cover as well. As the Green Card Agency, we have contacts across Europe and beyond. So it's a very exciting job, and yeah, as I say, 6 years now seems unbelievable, but here we are. But along the way, I've picked up little specializations, mainly because I write a lot of stuff for the MIB. I draft all our responses to consultations and calls for evidence, for instance. And so this area of connected and autonomous vehicles kind of became my lead by osmosis, and I report to the Chief Technical Officer, Nick Robbins, and the Chief Executive, both the one who's recently left and Angus, who started on the 1st of July, are very, very much engaged in this whole subject. It's one of our major priorities. So my plan is, as Jeff said, to speak for about half an hour. I've got 15 slides that I'll whiz through, hopefully quite quickly and painlessly. And although I'm happy to be interrupted, but I think in general it's better to take questions at the end, if that's okay with everyone, because the simple fact that I found that my presentations quite often answer questions that people have in the earlier slides, and if I respond at that point, I'm then just repeating myself in the later slides. So having said that, I'll move on and say that yeah, I've got these 5 areas to talk about. Jeff mentioned the effect of this the autonomous vehicle technology on the MIB, but I'm very much going to talk about the effects that we perceive for insurers as well of the legislation that's in place, and then move on to just a little look at why we're concerned about the cyber angle, and what we see as the way forward. Yeah, so that's the outline of what I plan to cover. Starting with what I'm sure for most of you will probably be repetition, and but just to remind, and for anyone who isn't aware of it, the road towards automation has been mapped out very clearly by the SAE, and I think most people rely on these levels when, I think the UN does as well, when referring to different levels of automation. So, we're currently in level 2, and the manufacturers are really pushing the envelope, in my opinion. The systems like the Ford Blue Cruise that are coming onto our roads are very capable, and the big difference is that if it's a level 2 vehicle, it's not autonomous, it's not self-driving, and the driver, they have to keep their attention, they have to keep engaged in the driving function the whole time, and they are liable, and they are responsible for taking back control if circumstances don't allow the vehicle system to continue controlling the car. So we're at the moment, we've got some very advanced systems being authorized, or they were being authorized by the last government, and I don't see any change happening on that. Level 3 is where for certain periods the driver would be able to disengage and engage in a defined range of other tasks. So what I'm hearing is that for the first systems, the government's thinking that you wouldn't be able to use your mobile phone because that's very, very distracting, but you might be allowed to look at a hard copy newspaper or look at a restricted amount of stuff on your, what they're now calling an infotainment system. But the driver who, during the period that the car is driving itself, becomes a passenger, is allowed to disengage at least partially from the driving function. There's a 10-second warning that the system will emit if it's got to the end of its operational design domain, which is the circumstances in which it can continue driving the vehicle, and the driver, well, the vehicle, the person in charge of the vehicle must then take control within 10 seconds and become a driver again and become liable again. So these first vehicles, which are not yet on the roads, will certainly be level 2 vehicles for the majority of the time, but with specified circumstances, likely to be motorway driving to start with, where the driver will be able to switch over to the vehicle. And then level 4 is just more of that, vehicles that do still have controls for human beings to drive them conventionally, but will be able to drive themselves probably for most of the time. And then the holy grail is level 5 vehicles, where you wouldn't probably even need to have any controls such as steering wheel and instruments. You just get in a kind of pod type vehicle that is then programmed to take you to your destination. So that was just to recap on those levels. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the Automated and Electric Vehicles Act, AVA, as everyone calls it. Now, this was introduced actually coincidentally 6 years ago, when the time I joined MIB. And, you know, that's a long time ago. And at that time, I remember it clearly, we had a very gung-ho Secretary of State in Grant Shapps, and he was determined to bring the first AV roads onto the systems, AV systems onto the roads sooner rather than later. And he had a slightly don't confuse me with the facts, my mind's made up approach. And certainly I thought, yeah, these things are just around the corner. And that's relevant because the Act was, by all appearances, drawn up in a bit of a hurry. And one of the things that appears just not to have been thought about is uninsured. The prospect of an AV being uninsured for its for the time that it's operating as an AV, and what would happen then, because that is not covered by the Road Traffic Act, which assumes a human driver in charge, and potentially a defendant if that driver is responsible for causing a collision. So there is this gap, this lacuna in the existing legislation. I will say that uninsured AVs are mentioned only in the context of public service vehicles. So a government or a police vehicle or whatever, the government or the authority may choose not to insure. They self-insure, and they take responsibility for third-party liabilities. But that obviously is just a very limited range, and apart from that, AVA simply doesn't mention uninsured AVs. So that is a crucial thing, a crucial consideration for MIB. We have been in discussion with the government for a long time. We believe, on the advice that we've been given, that AVA would need amendment in order to give us the same rights as insurers, which I'll come on to in just a moment. The last government didn't think that, and well, at the moment we're still just in contact with officials. We've got meetings with ministers arranged, so we don't know yet to what extent that might change, but it's going to be front of the top of the agenda for the meetings that we will have shortly, or that our chief executive will have shortly with ministers. So, and then insurer liability under AVA. I will say at this point that any red you see in these quotes that I'm including in the slides are my own highlighting, just to draw your attention to it. Insurer, sorry, yeah, the liability for the insurer is in all circumstances. The insurer must respond if the vehicle is driving itself and is held to cause a collision occurs and the vehicle is thought to have been responsible. The insurer must respond, and so the language saying that insurers can't exclude responsibility is very, very categorical, and that's why I highlighted it in red here. It really strikes a chord with me when it says, it can't be excluded in this way or in any other way. And I'm sure as lawyers, you recognise that that's a very sort of categorical statement in a piece of legislation. And the exclusions are very, very limited indeed. And again, I've highlighted those two phrases because if an insurer can limit liability, it's only meaning that the insured person will not be considered a third party, or the person in charge of the vehicle, because in all other circumstances, the person in charge, when the vehicle switches to self-driving mode, becomes a passenger and is a third party for the purposes of compensation. And the exclusions are limited to if the insured person has somehow tampered with the vehicle software or failed to download a safety critical download or update to the software. That's one circumstance. The other is expressed as contributory negligence, but it amounts to an exclusion, I think, is effectively if you have an AV and you allow it to drive itself in a circumstance which is not appropriate, then again, there might be an exclusion in your policy, meaning that you yourself won't get compensation. But of course, it doesn't affect any passengers in the vehicle or any other third parties. And on that second one, I've spoken to many people who know a lot more about these technologies than I do, and they say, well, that's a very strange statement, because if the AV is programmed only to drive in certain circumstances, the controller of the vehicle will not be able to instruct it to drive in other circumstances because the system will just refuse to respond. So nobody quite knows the reason for having that clause in there. And if any of you do know, please tell me. But the real point is that the capacity, the opportunity for insurers to exclude any kind of liability for vehicles when they're driving themselves is absolutely tiny. And actually of more concern to the MIB is this right to receive, the right to seek recovery. Obviously, being in this legislation, it makes it a statutory right. And this is the way it's expressed. I've highlighted these in red because some other audiences, the wording is not clear that this is actually a right to receive recovery. But you're all lawyers, and I'm sure you recognise that that is the sort of legal way of saying that effectively, in most circumstances, the insurer, having paid compensation in a situation where they believe the vehicle to have been at fault, can go to the manufacturer in most cases, or possibly the software provider, to seek to recover their losses. So that's a really important clause, and it goes right to the heart of what I said earlier, that the MIB is not liable for any uninsured AVs when they're driving themselves under this legislation, and the reason we think AVA would need to be updated is that we would demand the same rights of recovery, but also the same limited exclusions that insurers are given under this legislation, and that remains an open question between us and the government, and one that we're keen to resolve. But the last government just actually stopped talking to us for the last several months, so we couldn't take it further one way or the other. So that's where we are on that. I would say, just in terms of insurer liability as well, the thing that we picked up on, or more specifically, some of our lawyers picked up on, was that this very, very limited scope for exclusions, and the fact that this legislation makes the insurer liable to respond in all circumstances, means that there is no scope for excluding terrorism risk. And under our arrangements for conventional vehicles, which is an Article 775 arrangement under the MIB's Articles of Association, we have mutualized that risk because that's what the insurance industry wanted, following the London Bridge and Westminster Bridge attacks in 2017. As things stand under AVA, there is no prospect of that particular mechanism being used. So this is something we're encouraging insurers to think about, because when these things come on the road, if it's conceivable that a circumstance might arise where one or more of them is used in a terrorism attack to cause damage directly, and it would not come to the MIB. And as I will come on to later, it could be a huge level of damages that insurers are really not set up to cope with. So it's possibly very, very challenging for insurers. And of course, as these things become more common and as they drive themselves more and more, this will become more and more of a concern if nothing changes. I'll move on to the next slide. I just wanted to, I'm sure you probably all know this, but again, just to recap, there was a 3-year review. The Department for Transport asked the Law Commission of England and Wales, but also the Law Commission of Scotland. They worked together on thinking about all the liabilities and thinking about what how AVA should be implemented, because of course AVA just sets the framework for regulation, and the Law Commission was commissioned to do a 3-year review, so it was meant to take a long time, and during that time they had 3 public consultations to which we responded, and the key issues we raised were pretty consistent. So firstly, the absence of provision for uninsured AVs in AVA. Our concerns that access to collision critical data for claims handling purposes should be adequate. And finally, cybersecurity. Finally, but perhaps most importantly, cybersecurity. So the Law Commission, we had a lot of talks with them, we made contact with them, we had meetings with them as well, and they heard all our concerns. But on the uninsured aspect, their report to government, which finally issued, I think, in late 2020, I think it went to government in late 2021 and became public in early 2022. It just mentions the absence of any provisions for uninsured uninsured AVs, and expresses the hope that MIB and the DFT will be able to agree new arrangements. So it didn't really take us any further forward. But the government did use the Law Commission's recommendations in drawing up the Automated Vehicles Act, the AV Act, which became law in May this year. So again, I've highlighted the three things which I think are important to us and the current audience. I think part one, first and foremost, the regulatory scheme. It's an enabling instrument. These principles, the authorization requirements, the data storage and sharing in particular, are going to be really, really important to insurers. And we had a number of meetings as an industry with the DFT and CCAV while this bill was going through Parliament, and we were assured that whatever's in the bill is providing the initial description of how AVs should be regulated, and that there will be everything to pay for and lots of consultation and talking as that's drawn up. And we now know that the time frame is expected to be the first AV systems coming onto our roads towards the end of 2026. And I think the current government has said, yes, that's okay. It may go a bit longer than that. So I think that's reassuring in that it's going to be a serious process. But the second thing I highlighted is criminal liability for vehicle use. This is essentially the fact that the driver becomes a passenger as soon as the vehicle starts driving itself. That's crucial for insurers because under the conventional vehicle insurance, the driver is not considered the third party. So, I mean, particularly for personal injury, which can be very great sums, they are not, a driver is not eligible to receive compensation. But if it's an AV driving itself, the driver's a passenger and a third party just like anyone else in the vehicle. And finally, I highlighted marketing restrictions. The reason that's very important for the insurance industry is that there's a lot of concern that the public already don't and will continue not really understanding the dividing line between a level 2 vehicle and a level 3 vehicle that I described before. And already, particularly in the United States, there have been some shocking examples of people driving Teslas and believing they are actually driving themselves when they've got this very advanced cruise control engaged. And there have been many fatal accidents caused by this, including the one which I found the most memorable, where two guys died in their Tesla because there was a horrific high-speed crash, and both bodies were found in the back seat. So one can only assume that the driver was showing off and said, my car's driving itself, and just to prove it, I'm going to join you in the back. And they both lost their lives. And that is a kind of illustration of why these restrictions are really important. And I'm very interested at the moment because Tesla are planning to bring their cruise control, that particular iteration of it, to the UK. And in the States, it's called total self-driving. Self-driving is the term that the government have chosen to indicate an autonomous vehicle, which is really controlling the vehicle rather than the driver. We're all being told we must say it's a self-driving vehicle. So I imagine that Tesla will not be allowed to use that term for their cruise control, which is a driver assist system, which is level 2, as I described earlier. So going on from there, I mentioned the access to data as being perhaps the single most important. Well, it's among the very most important things. It has great priority for the insurance industry. So I thought it'd be interesting just to show you the chapter 3 under part 1 of the Act, and then this particular paragraph. And there's just one little line there about sharing of information, and so that's the bit for insurers, sharing with private business, such as vehicle manufacturers or insurers. Again, we're a little bit concerned because, again, there's no other kinds of compensatory body are not mentioned, but we're told that we can relax because it says such as. So if the MIB becomes responsible for as a guarantee fund, it could include us as well. It doesn't exclude others that are not mentioned there. But yeah, I was concerned that it's such bland language, and it just doesn't even use the word data. It talks about information. But again, in the meetings I mentioned, we were reassured that it is talking about sharing of data, and that CCAV specifically are aware of the importance of adequate vehicle data for claims handling process. I call it collision critical vehicle data because obviously no insurer would want all the vehicle data. It's absolutely massive, the amount of vehicle data that's collected on the vehicle's control system. But even as we go into the regulatory phase and as we argue for an adequate definition of what data must be made available to insurers and potentially the MIB, we're aware that the actual process of getting to that data could be in itself very challenging, because vehicle manufacturer, everyone will need to collaborate. Potentially the vehicle owner or keeper would have to collaborate because the data will be considered personal data and subject to the protections of the Data Protection Act and the UK GDPR. The attitude of the vehicle manufacturer, who will be in charge of the server that the data is ultimately controlled by. They'll need to have a collaborative atmosphere, and certain siren voices are saying just that in itself might be difficult to achieve. I mean, I guess we won't know until it becomes a reality and things are tested, and things are tested in the courts and all the rest of it. But it's something we're going to have to try and pin down during the regulatory process to make sure that there is adequate collaboration. So moving swiftly on, that's just a little slide I like. Doesn't really say anything apart from illustrating that insurers will need to know whether a person is sitting there in control of the vehicle, or whether all those vehicle sensors that you see in the bottom right picture will be the thing that's dictating the vehicle behavior. So that was just a little illustration. This is an illustration of something that was discussed in 2019 but hasn't grown wings, much to my disappointment. This is a Thatcham idea for how data, if there's a collision, so at point one you've got the vehicle on its side, the data would immediately go through the cloud to the manufacturer or the whoever's in control of the data, the system of the vehicle. It would go to their server, and then basically, because it's recognized as a collision, the collision critical data would bounce off that through to this thing which could be a neutral server, and that if it was the MIB, and it wouldn't necessarily be the MIB providing that service, but that shows the sort of neutral server with the MID, the motor insurance database, directly connected to us. And of course, the MID is one of our databases. So then it would all be sort of processed and go to the insurer. That's at point 6, and then the claim would be handled. The victims would be informed, and the claim would be handled. That's point 7. We've had some interesting talks on that with the DFT, but it really hasn't gone anywhere. And whether it's likely to not now or not, I don't know. I suspect the vehicle manufacturers may resist it tooth and nail, but that remains to be seen. So again, just a little illustrative picture to show how these would be level 2 vehicles, and the driver would be in control, but the different sensors they have to effectively allow the driver to take their feet off the pedals and potentially their hand off the steering wheel while the vehicle's using data to control itself. As we move forward to actual AVs, autonomous vehicles, they will sorry, I've skipped a slide there. Yeah, the autonomous vehicles, this is a very, very busy slide, but they will be in touch with their whole environment. And to make sense of the slide, if you start with the larger of the two vehicle icons in that slide, right in the middle bottom, it basically shows how the vehicle and then the vehicle systems right above it will have different functions, some of them internal, like the event data recorder, and then the telematics system and the infotainment system. All of that sort of micro environment of the vehicle systems will be connecting in different ways to the environment. And this slide just shows the different levels of connection through a range of sensors, and the infotainment system, the fact that that will be connecting with a whole range of stuff, but also potentially connecting to the vehicle control system, I think is one particular cause for concern on cybersecurity grounds, which I'm about to just say a few words about. So that's just a little illustration of the whole environment of the vehicle. But it will, this is the slide I jumped to, it will depend on 5G. And yeah, I've been to a number of talks now by experts who know a lot about this technology, which I don't, and apparently it works in a very different way to 4G. It's not an evolution, but it's a jump to a new technology. And some of the experts I've listened to are quite concerned about its vulnerabilities. So, and this obviously includes the US government. So those two little quotes from last year, I'll just read them very quickly. 5G represents a complete transformation of telecommunication networks, introducing a wealth of benefits that will pave the way for new capabilities and support connectivities for applications like smart cities, autonomous vehicles, and telemedicine. But the same report later on says this supply chain is susceptible to the malicious or unintentional introduction of risks, such as malicious software and hardware, counterfeit components, and poor designs, manufacturing processes, and maintenance procedures. 5G hardware, software, and services provided by trusted entities could increase vulnerabilities of network asset compromise and affect data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So we're moving to a world where everything's going to be connected to everything else, and yet cyber experts say there are inherent vulnerabilities there. So this is what is worrying us, and as we move towards the regulation of AVs, we think the issues need to be resolved, and that will be done during the regulation process. We think it's really important that the insurance industry gets its act together and speaks with one voice and makes the necessary representations. And because we are the authority for the compensating authority for cybersecurity, for terrorism incidents involving conventional vehicles, and potentially this could happen it could be extended to autonomous vehicles, we have taken a lead on the cybersecurity implications. We commissioned a report from Thales, the big defense company that works in close collaboration with government, and we chose them together with government. So it's a report commissioned by the MIB, but jointly commissioned with the DFT and CCAV. And we're processing the findings of that report now, and we're sharing it with our members. And I don't know if any of you have attended our meetings, but we're having briefing meetings, and we have welcomed lawyers to some. We've had 2 meetings so far, but particularly the second one had some lawyers represented, and we're planning a third one for November. And if anyone's interested, please get in touch with me, because we can include a few lawyers in that, potentially. But the report is quite concerning in terms of reinforcing that message that there are vulnerabilities there, very, very difficult to mitigate against or prevent, and these vehicles with very powerful control systems could potentially be hacked. In the worst case scenario, several could be hacked and used at the same time in various ways, potentially by ill-intentioned actors. And finally, we need to collaborate. The industry needs to collaborate with everyone concerned, but particularly government, to find solutions. And there are some. It's very early days, but there are different lines of thought on how that might occur. But one of the interested parties is, just to provide a pointer to what we might be thinking, is Pool Re, and we are in discussion with Pool Re, who are the reinsurer body for property damage resulting from acts of terrorism. So yeah, a lot of questions, answers as yet unclear, and it'll be very interesting to see what the new government, what attitude they're taking. And finally, you'll be pleased to know, this is my final slide. We are the Green Card Agency, as I mentioned before, and we think that apart from all the other considerations, the thought of vehicles driving themselves across borders and driving in environments that is not their home environment really needs to be addressed. We have established a new working group in the COB, the Council of Bureau, which is the administering authority for the green card system, and we're working with 6 other countries in that group. We just started our work, but we're trying to bottom out, obviously from an insurer's perspective, what driving across all the different regimes that we have in Europe, driving into and out of countries which have very different regulatory regimes and legal requirements for compensation. There are some very complicated scenarios that could arise from the fact that the vehicle's driving itself in the future. And I would stress that for us, it's in the future. The very first systems are on the road in Germany, I think, and there might be other European countries, I don't know, but for us, as I say, the time frame is probably going to be around 2 years from now. So that brings me to the end.